Chris Lee and Blake Lovell of Southeastern 14 presented by Stakes. We're here to do power rankings. It's Monday morning. This is December the 12th. Blake, a lot of great basketball in the SEC over the weekend, at least great games that told us more about some teams. Our channel is always presented by Stakes. We start from the bottom. I think the bottom two or three are fairly easy. And this week, again, we have gone with South Carolina at 14.
Yeah. I think it's probably best just to discuss the three teams at the bottom instead of just South Carolina by itself, because I don't really know what to say about South Carolina at this point. They beat Presbyterian. That's all I got. But yeah, I mean, they're, South Carolina is, as we said, I mean, they're a team that has, a blowout loss at George Washington and not really, I don't know. It's a team that's still a work in progress, and they got to go to UAB on Wednesday. That'll be a tough game. And then you've got Vanderbilt and Georgia, and I don't know how you separate those two teams right now. Vanderbilt's coming off the loss to Grambling at home after they beat Pitt. Georgia, I think, is still a team that had their shot to win at Georgia Tech, and their losses too are against quality competition, but their wins are not a whole lot. I mean, they've got 7 wins, and I don't even know what you'd say.
They've got one win over a Ken Palm top 250 team. Yeah.
That's so, I mean, they beat St. Joe's and Bucknell, and I mean, both those are top 250. So it's like, it's not a whole lot to go on to this point, but Georgia will play Notre Dame. I think it's on Sunday. We'll learn a bit more about Georgia maybe moving forward, but I think we kind of know what they are to this point. And same with South Carolina and Vandy. I just think these are 3 teams that are probably going to struggle to get out of these bottom 4 spots.
Yeah, I think there's a clear bottom 3. Vanderbilt would be 12. Vanderbilt has beaten Pitt, beaten Temple on the road, but it also lost to Grambling State at home this weekend, and also to Southern Miss. I mean, just not a lot of meat on Vandy's resume. And that's a situation where what I'm hearing is Jerry Stackhouse could be in a little bit of trouble if he doesn't start winning some games.
Well, we'll see if they can start winning some games, because they've won some games, but they also lost some. And NC State on Saturday will not be an easy one either. That's a team that's 8-3 to this point. And so, that's going to probably be a challenge too. And then, start SEC play. I think Vandy's got Tennessee, Arkansas, Bama. Got to go to Missouri in there. So, not an easy start to league play either.
Okay, the next 2 teams I think you would have to categorize as severely disappointing. We've got A&M at 11, Florida at 10. A&M has got 1 win over a Ken Palm top 50 team. It's lost to Colorado and Boise State pretty badly in chances to get quality borderline NCAA tournament type wins. This is just not the team that I think everybody expected, and A&M and Florida's also had trouble beating good teams.
Yeah, I mean, Florida's best win at this point is Florida State, and that's not saying a whole lot since the Seminoles are 2-9 basically. So, I mean, it's I don't know what to make of Florida. I mean, look, they came off that game against UConn. We said it was going to be a challenge. You wanted to see how they perform, but at home they get beat by 21, and they just they look like they didn't know what to do in that game against UConn at times. And so, I mean, just, and UConn does that to a lot of people. I mean, they should be the number 1 team in the country, in my opinion, heading into, this week. So, I mean, they can do that to a lot of people, but I think you're probably still a little disappointed that Florida just couldn't do much of anything in that. So, I mean, Florida still a lot to figure out. I think even Colin Castleton, this is a team that will have some ups and downs, I think, for a while now. And moving into SEC play, A&M just, I don't know, they're kind of very inconsistent. I think you don't really know what you're getting with them. Didn't play well in the first half against Oregon State, but then was able to come out and just kind of quickly put them away in the second half. But they're another team. They go to Memphis on Saturday. Memphis playing every SEC team, it feels like, this season. They go to Memphis on Saturday. I don't have a lot of optimism for them to be able to get a win there. But I mean, they've been disappointing, but then again, maybe if we look back on it, should have saw some of this coming, maybe with just kind of a coaching change in Florida and reshuffling of the roster. And then with A&M, just like I said, going the season, having no Quentin Jackson and just kind of missing that something, whatever it is. I feel like that's kind of still there for the Aggies.
Next is another team in transition under a first-year coach. Before that, though, a shout-out to our sponsor, Stakes. You can predict anything in the game for free. See how you measure up against fans and influencers. You can flex your wins by broadcasting your takes to our community of sports fans with just a few taps of your phone. You can earn credibility. You can build your public perceptions track record or public predictions track record by winning competitions and earning NFT trophies for making the perfect call. Go to playwithstakes.com/14. Use our invite code Southeastern14 for a double welcome bonus. Okay, next up, Missouri, which had a bitterly disappointing 95-67 loss to Kansas. Missouri was really never in that game. From what I could tell, I didn't get to see any of it because of a personal situation. Well, let's call it what it was. I was watching my kids play basketball. But anyway, I did follow the score, and it didn't look like Missouri was ever in that game.
Well, I mean, they just didn't play defense, and we said I said I thought they could certainly keep it interesting. That was based on their offense, and it was just kind of the double whammy where they just missed, I don't know how many layups it felt like they missed in that game. Missed a lot of close shots at the rim, missed some shots that they've made, and a lot of those were open shots, but they also took some tough shots, which you knew was going to have against Kansas. And so you combine that with just defense that was non-existent. I mean, they just didn't play defense. There's no other way to put it. Yeah, it was pretty disappointing. I think if you're a Missouri fan coming into that, looking at it as your first real test of the season, and they were just, they were walloped in terms of just having no answers for stopping Kansas. So I think that will, certainly reset your expectations a little bit on Missouri. Like I said, I still think they're a quality team, but they've clearly got a lot to figure out on the defensive side, which we already knew. It's just you see how much they could get exposed now against a top-tier team. Yeah. And now that you actually see it, you thought they had issues before, but those issues are significant. And I think until they figure those things out defensively, it's going to be a lot to figure out. And look, Isaiah Mosley doesn't play in that one. I know that's a big talking point too. People are, looking for answers, and I'm sure some Missouri fans that were on the bandwagon jumped off completely after that game. But I still think there's a lot to work with on this roster and to figure out. But clearly they've got some things they've got to fix.
Yeah, they can score. The defensive end is where there appear to be issues. But okay, this is where I feel like we kind of get into the tier of NCAA bubble teams in terms of how it feels. I haven't looked up the net rankings this morning, and those will change a lot anyway. But Missouri and Ole Miss right in that territory. I mean, I'm looking at Ole Miss and what it's done so far on KenPom. It's number 50 nationally. It's beaten Florida Atlantic at 48, beaten Stanford at 66. Lost close ones to Oklahoma and Memphis, which are probably right now NCAA tournament teams. Memphis for sure. And then Ole Miss responds after a week off by crushing Valparaiso in the 30-year-old grudge game or whatever you'd like to call it. But in any case, Ole Miss checks in at 8 in our countdown.
Yeah. I think for Ole Miss, it's, you don't have a lot to go on just yet, but I think you're seeing some things that, are there. And I think that's kind of all you wanted to see to this point with Ole Miss is, now that they've gotten Deshaun Ruffin back, it feels like kind of they've got their group now in place and kind of understand what the rotation needs to be, with Matthew Morrell and, all those guys, Brakefield and Burns, and go up and down the list. Like, I think that, the depth may be a little underrated on this Ole Miss team, especially now, like I said, when you get Ruffin back in the mix. I think that there's clearly some upside there for them. And, it's just you don't have a lot to go on yet. I mean, they lost that close game to Oklahoma, lost at Memphis, but like we said, Memphis is really good. And, now I think these are a couple of interesting games Ole Miss has coming up next. They play UCF and Temple. I feel like 2 games they should win, but, those are also 2, somewhat tricky games maybe just based on the opponent. So if they come out and win these 2, then I think you feel a lot better about Ole Miss heading into, the start of SEC play, which, oh, by the way, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi State, Auburn, their first 4 games in league play. Those are all tough, but they're all quality win opportunities for Ole Miss to really start trying to build that resume, I think, for the tournament. So,
did you get a chance to watch any of LSU and Wake Forest?
Yep.
What a crazy game that one was.
It's up and down.
I'm looking at Ken Palm, and LSU won that game, if you didn't see it, behind really good play from its 2 Murray State transfers. Well, to be more accurate, really good play from KJ Williams, and maybe not great play from Justice Hill, but he made the winning basket in that game. Wake had a 90% win probability in that game. There was a 27-4 Wake Forest run early in the first half, a 17-2 LSU run to end the half, and an 11-0 run for LSU early in the second half in that one. So if you like your games all over the place, you would have loved that one.
Well, I mean, I think you see what they're capable of with KJ Williams. And, Adam Miller, I think for them to win that game with Adam Miller only scoring 3 points, he plays 37 minutes, only makes 1 shot. That tells me a lot more about LSU. But again, you had to have a basically career day from KJ Williams to get it. But I think it shows you that he can do that. And I think, again, if you would ask me if they won that game, neutral court atmosphere without Adam Miller being a factor at all offensively, I would have said probably not, because, that's not a bad Wake Forest team. And, Tyree Appleby, of course, former Florida standout, goes for 26, looked really good in that game for Wake Forest. But yeah, I mean, KJ Williams just tremendous. And I think, as we always say, when you have a guy like that can do what he can do, you're always going to have a chance. And I feel like that's the name of the game right now for LSU is, has what they've done to this point. Is it that impressive? No, because they haven't played the toughest schedule, but still, I think that was a big game just to kind of see what they can do when an Adam Miller struggles. And yet, KJ Williams just kind of said, all right, I'll do it all myself. And he proved he could do that. So they're sitting in a nice spot. Look, the next 3 games are not going to do much for them. NC Central, Winthrop, ETSU. But, if they can just win those games, get out of non-conference play with only 1 loss, not a whole lot that's going to kind of boost their resume in non-conference play, but you're also avoiding any of those bad losses if they can win these next 3. So that'll be a good spot, I think, for LSU, which, as we said, a very, the toughest probably first half of the conference schedule, maybe the easiest, quote unquote, second half of the SEC schedule. But yeah, they're going to really be tested that first part.
Yeah, LSU's that close to being unbeaten. Just, I think a lot of people watching know that, but if you don't, there you go. Speaking of which, this is where we get into the tier mostly of 1-0 loss teams. Auburn took its first loss to Memphis this weekend. I believe that one was at Atlanta. I didn't get to see it. What did you take away from that one?
Yeah, it was not great for Auburn. That's kind of what I took away from it. And I know people looking, say, dropping Auburn maybe down to this spot after 1 loss, but I kind of felt like they were holding on to that spot already at whatever we had them at, I think at 5. And yeah, they didn't look great in this one at times. They had their chances. I'm not saying they look terrible, but I don't know. They just still, like we said, it's not going to be a great shooting team. They go 6 of 24 from 3. Memphis let's give Memphis some credit too. Kendrick Davis was fantastic.
Terrific.
He was really good in that game. And I think, again, you have to credit the opponent sometimes more than just knock Auburn. We've said with Auburn, I mean, there's things that we've talked about that have stood out with them that you feel like are, still a work in progress. I still think offensively there's some things that it seemed like every time they get close, they just couldn't get that bucket to fall, rattle in, rattle out. And I just think it was one of those type of games where every time they tried to sort of make that run in the second half, it just didn't happen. And I know there's some Auburn fans that are frustrated with the officiating and that kind of stuff, but at the end of the day, I just think Memphis was the better team in this game. And I think for Auburn, they're 8-1. It's not like this loss is going to just completely send them the opposite direction. But they've got a couple interesting games coming up too here before they head into SEC play in a couple weeks at USC, at Washington. So I'm curious to see how they sort of bounce back. Georgia State up next, but how they bounce back in these next 3 games. Be interested to see that for an Auburn team that I still think defensively, they're not going to give up 82 points every game, but give credit to the other side too, because those guys played pretty well. So,
okay, next up, our surprise team in the SEC. I was higher on Mississippi State than you were going into the season, but I could also understand your reasons that you weren't. And Chris Jans' team has been terrific. 22 in KenPom as of this morning. That's, of course, Mississippi State. The Bulldogs get a 69-51 win at Minnesota last night. I say last night, that would be Sunday night. Quality wins over Marquette and Utah, and the Bulldogs are unbeaten as we head into the middle part of December.
I think the people who were high on Mississippi State were high on them, but they weren't this high on them.
No,
maybe move them up a couple spots into the bubble tier, but I don't think anyone thought they were going to be this good to this point. And still haven't given up more than 55 points in a game. And let's just say this too: I don't want to take anything away from Mississippi State, but Minnesota's not a very good team.
No.
But that's what you wanted to see.
But it was on the road. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but my point is, you wanted to see them do what they did. They didn't play around. It wasn't a game that, they let someone just, stay right there with them. They came out, they took care of business and did what they've done all season. They defended, and like I said, still have not allowed more than 55 points in a game. They played 9 games now. And, 3 of those games were against, power conference competition, basically, right? With Marquette, Utah, and Minnesota. So that tells you something. Jackson State, Nicholls State up next. They got Drake after that. I'm not trying to put the jinx on anybody, but if they play like they played to this point, they're going to be unbeaten heading into the, SEC opener against Alabama on December 28th. And yeah, they've been a huge surprise for me. I just didn't, and I still think it's the same thing. I don't think that offensively there's still a team that I think will have some things to figure out once they start playing some of the top teams in the league, but defensively, they're as good as anybody. And credit to Chris Jans for what he's been able to do. And he's found the right rotation. He's found the pieces, and he's got everybody to buy in to the fact that, look, for them to be successful, it's got to come on the defensive side, because I don't think this is an elite offensive team. So if they're going to get there, to where they want to go, they're going to have to do it on the defensive end. And so far, they've done it in every game.
We've got Kentucky at 4. Kentucky is 6 in KenPom. Both of us have had questions about Kentucky the past couple of weeks, given what we see when we watch Kentucky offensively. But Kentucky did beat Michigan a week ago, and then this weekend beats James Jones's Yale team, which is a very solid opponent. Yale 85 in KenPom, but I don't know. I think you expected Kentucky to maybe do a little more there. Maybe I'm being hard, but I don't know that Kentucky has definitively answered our questions that we've had for a couple of weeks now. But I mean, I'm certainly not counting Kentucky out. I thought that Kentucky would be the league's best team coming into the year.
Well, look, it's like we do power rankings. Somebody has to be 1 through 14, and when there are at least 2 teams in front of them that have significantly better resumes at this point, you have to put those teams ahead of Kentucky. And I will, if you want to make the argument that Kentucky should be 3 and the team we have at 3 should be 4, that's fine. But I still think that the team we have at 3 is probably the team that should be at 3, and Kentucky's right here. But again, what do we say, right? Like last week, what was it? The AP poll, which we always say we don't really pay a lot of attention to, but if you do want to pay attention to it, I mean, there were 4 SEC teams in the top 11 last week, and none of them were named Kentucky. Tennessee, Alabama, Arkansas, Auburn were all in the top 11 in the AP poll. No Kentucky. The Kentucky was 16th. So when you look at it that way, I know the AP poll, as we said, I don't really put a lot of stock into it, but that just kind of shows you that you've at least got 4 other teams that have that same sort of, argument for being a top 10 team, basically. And yes, I mean, give Kentucky credit for what they've done at this point, but still, we have to at least go off of what we've seen, and what we saw in Michigan State game was a little disappointing. Certainly what we saw in the Gonzaga game was disappointing. And so I think you still have to acknowledge that exists. And yes, they've now won 4 in a row, but they're going to get a big opportunity coming up on Saturday against UCLA, which that will definitely give them a boost if they can win that game. But yeah, this isn't us knocking Kentucky by having them at 4, because this is still, even at 4 is probably a top 10 type team, just given the strength of the SEC. But it's just that I think the 3 teams ahead of them should probably be ahead of them right now. Will that be the case a month from now? Maybe not. Probably not, in my opinion, but that's just kind of where things are at this point.
I think it's appropriate here to offer a word of encouragement to Kentucky fans who may be disappointed, or maybe a sentence of encouragement. Do you know what that would be?
What's that?
You're not Louisville.
Yeah, that's true. No one else, though, I guess, at this point.
Wow.
So
Louisville and Cal are having very, if we want to go off the path for a minute, very, very rough years.
Former SEC ties with both, right? Mark Fox,
yes, both,
Cal, and Kenny Payne at Louisville. So yeah,
neither have won a game. Okay, before we get into our top three, which I think you can argue the order, and we will a little bit. A quick word for our new sponsor, BROTHROW, which lets you bet on all 50 states. It's not the house, so bettors have a fair chance at winning. Only sports betting platform that doesn't take a cut of every bet. There's no deposit minimum into a BROTHROW account. No minimum bets. You don't need to connect your bank account. Bettors pay each other directly. It's a hassle-free process that lets you get in the action in seconds. If you don't like betting $11 to win $10, I think you'll love BROTHROW. In any case, support our new sponsor here. Go to BROTHROW, that's BROTHROW.com/SE14. You can see that on the ticker below and in the description of our video. We are excited about that partnership. Okay, Blake. Number 3, we've got, I need to check this. I've got it written down. I believe we went Arkansas 3. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. Explain that one. Arkansas, of course, suffered a very severe season injury to Trayvon Brazile, but played pretty well in a nice win over Oklahoma this weekend.
It's the same argument in that, it's look, we had Arkansas at what, 1 last week, I think. But I think the two teams in front of them probably did a little more with those. All three of those teams felt pretty even. And so, again, these are our power rankings. They're not a science. They're not anything else. But, yes, Arkansas, I thought, bounced back in a big way, by being able to win that game without Brazile. And we said we wanted to see what things would look like without him. Well, you started to see some guys step up, and that's what you wanted. I mean, Jordan Walsh, kind of talked about it, thought he had to be one of those guys. He did, played 31 minutes in that game, 12 points, had a block, couple steals. That's what you want to see, I think. And, Nick Smith is just terrific. There's no other way to put it. Ricky Council just continues to go out there and, I feel like has just been a rock for them the entire season and probably still doesn't get enough credit. I mean, he played all 40 minutes in that game. Just someone they can't take off the floor. So, again, we may have Arkansas at 3 here after them being at number 1 for a couple weeks. But, I also think it's, again, we can't ignore the team that we're going to have number 1. We can't ignore what they did, and we can't ignore what the team we have at number 2 did either. But I think these 3 teams right now, and I think you're getting close to being able to just throw Kentucky in there too. And I'm not afraid to throw Mississippi State in there either just yet. Just to kind of say, look, these are all legit teams, and Auburn's a legit team too. Like I said, we moved Auburn to 6 this week, but you're talking about 6 top 25 teams, in my opinion, with those 6 teams. But I think you're seeing, especially with these 3, to what they've accomplished at this point. I think there's very little that separates our top 3, in my opinion. And I just think Arkansas is, like you said, you could just as easily make the argument that they should be at 1 again. But I was very impressed by the way they were able to win that Oklahoma game. And now we kind of see, with a Walsh stepping up and those kind of guys, Arkansas is going to be just fine. So
you mentioned Ricky Council. He has been a little bit more of an offensive, well, not a little bit more. He's been a really, really good offensive player for them. And the way he was advertised coming in was, I think, more, and not that he's not a great defender. He is. He was the defensive player of the year in his league for Wichita State last year. But he's been more of an offensive force than I think we'd expected.
I think, yes, in terms of what we expected his role to be, assuming that Nick Smith was going to play from game 1. Because he can score. I mean, he scored a bit. He scored a lot at Wichita State. But I think that was more of a finding a role for all these guys that were newcomers. We kind of said, all right, he's probably going to be slotted into this defensive type role because They've got Nick Smith. They've got Anthony Black. And again, I think that's where not having Nick Smith early on, that gave a Ricky Council a chance to kind of step in there and say, all right, like I can score. And, he's still doing it. So, yeah, I think it's never a good thing when a guy doesn't play due to injury, but it kind of allowed him to really kind of cement himself as, we're not just talking about Nick Smith and Anthony Black. Like Ricky Council is a force to be dealt with. So
next up, we've got Tennessee at 2. And since that Colorado game a month ago, the Vols have really gotten it together. Santiago Vescovi did play in that game. We had some questions about that. The box score line wasn't great. But here's what stands out to me. This is Tennessee's points given up since the Colorado game on November 13th. 50 to Florida Gulf Coast, 45 to Butler, 66 to Southern Cal, but that was an overtime. 50 to Kansas, which got, 90-something on Missouri this weekend. 40 to McNeese State, 40 to Alcorn State, 49 to Eastern Kentucky, and then 53 to Maryland in New York this weekend in a win that Tennessee controlled pretty much from start to finish. Maryland had a late 17-3 run, and that one to make it a lot closer. But my goodness, what Tennessee is doing on defense is incredibly impressive.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, you can certainly argue they're the best defensive team in the country, and you could argue that Tennessee and Mississippi State maybe two of the 3 best defensive teams in the country to this point, just given what they've accomplished. But the reason we moved Tennessee here, and I don't remember, we may have had them at 2 last week, but the reason I think that, again, you have to reward what you see, and I think for them to get a win against Maryland. Now, look, anybody that watched that game will tell you, second half was kind of
interesting.
That frustration point was there in terms of the offensive issues. But they were so good defensively in the first half that they were able to hold on. And that's all that matters sometimes. It's just you find a way to hold on and win. And like you said, Vescovi, I know didn't do a whole lot from a points perspective, didn't hit a lot of shots, but if you take him out of that game, he doesn't play 37 minutes, then what? So I think it was significant for him to be on the floor because he's still, leading, I think second or third leading rebounder or something, but he grabbed quite a few rebounds, which we're used to seeing with him. Had a lot of steals. And so I think that's just, the stuff he brings to the table, and, that ultimately adds up and allows you to get a win like that. So, yeah, I mean, you can't ignore with Tennessee. They've beaten Maryland, they've beaten Kansas, they've beaten USC, teams like that. So I think that's kind of the thing now when you look at them. And look, they go to Arizona on Saturday. Right now, I think with the way Tennessee plays defense, Arizona's, a great offensive team, but it's just, will Tennessee be able to kind of control things their way versus an Arizona team that will play one of the fastest tempos under Tommy Lloyd and really just try to, run their offense and get up and down the floor. Interesting, stylistic matchup there. But man, you look at what Tennessee's done to this point. Yeah, you can't ignore, beating a top 15, 20 Maryland team and just looking as good defensively as they have. So,
okay, it was not an offensive masterpiece, especially in the first half. That goes both ways. Houston and Alabama was not the most entertaining game to watch in the first half. Alabama pulls it out down the stretch by hitting free throws in a very lit atmosphere in Houston. Man, that was so much fun watching how pumped that arena was. They did the red and white checkerboard thing. They wore the throwback uniforms, and Alabama went into a very hostile environment in the national spotlight and got a huge win over what had been Ken Palm's #1 team. And Alabama's only loss is to Connecticut, which is now Ken Palm's #1 team.
Yeah, I mean, there's no other choice but to put Alabama at 1. Like, we can argue a lot of different things, but I just don't think there's any other choice. You can argue 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, but I think there is no argument for the fact that Alabama should be the #1 team right now in our power rankings, because they've now beaten 2 #1 teams, both away from home. One was a true road game at Houston. One, of course, the neutral Phil Knight Invitational against Carolina, which I know Carolina, didn't seem like the #1 team at the time, but they were. And their only loss on the season now is to, like you said, the new #1 team in UConn. So when you take all that into account, I just think there's no there's no question that right now, to me, Alabama has to be the team at the top. And it was so impressive the way they were able to win that game. Houston looked like they were what? I mean, you look at kind of how that game played out. Yeah, I mean, come from behind the way Alabama did, and not just coming from behind, but coming from behind down 15 with basically 15 minutes left in the game on the road against the number one team in the country. Which again, there going to be people that write off Houston after that. My opinion on Houston hasn't changed. I think you could even argue that Houston's maybe still the number 2 team or 3 team if you want to put Alabama in front of them. Whatever you want to do. I just think that, yeah, I don't, Alabama to me has proven that, when you're a number 1 team, you don't want to see them because, and it's kind of like last year, right? We said they kind of, they would meet the level of competition last year. They beat Gonzaga, they beat Houston last year, and guess what? Like, what's next now? Talk about building a resume. Wins over Houston, Carolina, Michigan State. Your only loss is the UConn. Now you got Memphis and Gonzaga coming up this week. I mean, my goodness. What else do you say about the opportunity that's available here? And this is just and keep in mind too, it's not just that Alabama went and won on the road against Houston, the number 1 team in the country. Like, Brandon Miller didn't have a field goal, and they still won that game.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what tells you the most. And what we said, we've been arguing since the start, Alabama might be the deepest team in the league. I think it's pretty clear now they're the deepest team in the league. And that paid off in that game at Houston. So, yeah, I think that they are, to me, that they have to be ranked in the top spot this week.
I say Alabama hit some free throws. They also missed a lot, too, 20 of 32. But in any case, I mean, Noah Clowney was great in that game. You mentioned last year's Alabama and the beat the good teams and lose to some of the bad ones. The difference this year's defense. Alabama really gets after you on that end of the floor. And speaking of schedule, Alabama's got 1 game against a team ranked outside, or actually, but between now and February the 18th, when Alabama plays Georgia, which is barely ranked outside of Ken Palm's top 100 at 109, every single game Alabama's going to play is against Ken Palm top 100 teams. Jackson State on December the 20th would be the 1 game that's not. So lots of great tests ahead for Alabama.
Yep. They certainly have the tools, I think, to win it all. It's just, can they keep playing defense the way they're playing defense? If they can, sky's the limit for them.
Any parting thoughts?
Nope. We'll have game previews as always for the big games this week. Not a ton, but there are some good ones on the weekend. Like we said, Alabama and Memphis will play on Tuesday. As always, we appreciate the support of our SEC basketball stuff, which will start to crank up here as we get closer to conference play. We'll have previews of every game once we get there, and a lot more stuff on the way. So,
yes, thank you for watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't. Thank you to Stakes and to BROTHROW, our partners. Appreciate you watching. We'll see you again soon at Southeastern 14, presented by Stakes.